What's up, guys? This is Arslan, and I am back with Infernal Hulk Issue 2, who's quite literally unleashing hell on Earth. The long and short of this is that Bruce Banner and the Incredible Hulk are split into two different beings, and that the Incredible Hulk body or persona is currently possessed by somebody known as the Eldest, who's the daughter of essentially this goddess named Venruvial, who quite literally is as powerful, or seemingly as powerful, as the one above. But where Venruvial was defeated, and then in turn the Eldest chose to awaken Venruvial, Venruvial was demoralized by that loss, and so in turn the Eldest consumed Venruvial, took all of her power, and is now preparing for another war against the one above all, which is actually going to unfold in issue number 5. And so what this does is this leads to this really cool statement, right? This kind of explanation, in the sense that it says, this is not the Hulk that you have known. He's something more. Now he holds some kind of sway over other monsters. An army of them is gathering around him in the Appalachian Mountains. The U.S. threw a full National Guard division at him, and he turned them into something horrible, which he did in the first issue, the last one that we covered. He just kind of transformed pretty much all of them into these monsters, which, if you're familiar with Marvel lore, there's actually a whole basis surrounding that, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. But the monologue goes on. We've been tracking Hulk's movements via satellite. We just lost him over the Atlantic Ocean. He's not just coming he's coming for you, and he's coming for everything. And that's when you find out it's Bucky Barnes talking directly to Namor the Submariner. Now, here's the thing. When it comes to Namor in Marvel Comics, outside of things like the Illuminati or potentially even events like Civil War, it's largely one of these you stay away, I stay away type things. The reason why I say kind of with Civil War is because during that story, you actually ended up learning that Namor the Submariner had secretly been creating splinter cells across Earth in the form of Atlanteans that had the ability to breathe on the surface through magic and so on, so that if the surface ever decided to launch an invasion against Atlantis again, that they could actually nip the whole thing in the bud and take the surface out before they became a threat. But for the most part, he just kind of stays down in Lemuria, right, within his Atlantean kingdom, and minds his business. And that's why he says, you surfacers have always spoken thus of Hulk. You cannot control him, so he is a threat. Scarcely one season past he was our ally. Now, we are to what? Destroy him? And that's where Bucky says, you should be more worried about this, Namor. He disappeared over the North Atlantic. He could be making a move for the Atlanteans or recruiting for his army. And that's where Namor just says, the oceans have monsters aplenty. Some are as old as the oceans themselves. Not one of them would follow any surface-dwelling brute. I have no love for Hulk nor Banner, but I will not slay your dragon for you. If you wish to bring him to heel, do it without my help. But in the midst of this whole speech, quite literally the dome of Atlantis just starts getting smashed in, and in turn Bucky just says, Namor, it's him, right? Get out of there. And that's where Namor just says, tend to your own home, Barnes, I will tend to mine. And that's where this voice kind of comes out of nowhere and says, speak the name of heaven, who dares awaken? And that's the crazy thing, because initially we don't know who this is, and what ends up happening is that Namor tells all the Atlanteans, right, do not attack the beast, save what Atlantean lives you can. So literally everyone's just fleeing as fast as humanly possible, and that's where Namor addresses him directly, right? Ngathil the God Eater, I thought you were a story for children. And he just like blasts Namor the Submariner. Now, here's an important thing to understand here. Let's kind of sidetrack from the story for a second, because there's some really dope lore that's involved. So a lot of you guys know that more recently in Marvel Comics, there have been changes made to things like the Elder Gods and their origins and different things like that. Well, this guy's not an Elder God. This guy actually predates the Elder Gods. He's what's known as a Great Old One. Now, the Great Old Ones are oftentimes synonymous with the many-angled ones, but the Great Old Ones are simply just kind of designed to establish individuals or monsters that existed at a time long before the Elder Gods. Now, most Great Old Ones are many-angled ones, guys like Shuma-Gorath, different things like that. But there were beings that existed around that same time, so I kind of lumped them all into effectively the same group, right? It may not necessarily be Marvel official, but honestly it makes it easier to just kind of track the whole mythos. But the general gist here is that the Great Old Ones existed on Earth kind of alongside humanity. Not really humanity as we know it, really more just like early man, but they were pretty dark and they were very twisted. It was not that uncommon to see these individuals tortured, tormented, different things like that, sacrificed in rituals by the Great Old Ones, all for the purpose of attaining power. The problem with the Great Old Ones in Marvel Comics is that it's twofold. The first is that there isn't really a definitive chronological timeline of the Great Old Ones, which is to say it's not cleaned up. It's still kind of messy, right? This is officially when they emerged, this is officially when they were gone and why they were gone. Instead, it's just kind of like varying stories that have been told over the years for why they vanished. For example, the Walk on the Wild Side story from Strange Titles, Volume 2, Issue Number 4 from Peter Gillis back in 1987, which is what Philip Kennedy Johnson really seems to be drawing on here, established the idea that where individuals like Shuma-Gorath, and honestly that's the only real definitive explanation we have, mostly because Shuma-Gorath is the most popular of the Great Old Ones within Marvel Comics, that while Shuma-Gorath and most of the Great Old Ones were ultimately banished, that some remained on Earth, and specifically Ngathil is one of them, right? On the other hand, Carnage Volume 2, Issue Number 14 establishes the idea that the Great Old Ones had existed on Earth until essentially the civil war among the Elder Gods, and then in the midst of that civil war, the Great Old Ones were either destroyed, consumed, or retreated. There isn't really a definitive explanation either way in Marvel canon. But the long and short of this is that when it comes to the Great Old Ones, they were on Earth at one point and have largely just been missing for quite some time. Which brings us back to Ngathil, because what Philip Kennedy Johnson is doing here is he's taking that mythos of the Great Old Ones and then rolling it into the Infernal Hulk storyline. And if I were a betting man, I would surmise he's actually going to give us a kind of timeline of events regarding the Great Old Ones and how we got here in Marvel Comics. But the fact is, right, that what ends up happening is that we're Ngathil attacking the entirety of Atlantis after having been woken up, that the Infernal Hulk shows up and just says, "I found you, little brother," and he says, "You have slept too long." And Ngathil addresses him and says, "You, why dress you in this low form? You stink of the tree dwellers." And that's where Infernal Hulk says, "This is my truest form, brother. It is strong." Now, this is a metaphorical statement. It's not a literal statement. It's not as though Eldest transformed into the Incredible Hulk. To say that this is my truest form is to simply say this is the form that best represents my rage, my aggression, how much I want to win, and how powerful I believe I am. That's really what it all comes down to. And that's why Ngathil responds in saying, "Get the gone. I sleep until mother's return." But that's where Infernal Hulk says, "Our mother of horrors is dead. I lead our house now. I command you to reclaim the oceans, devour the mortals and their ships, divide their numbers, and trap them on the land." Basically go back to what you were doing when you existed alongside so many of the Great Old Ones in the early days of our race. Which is why I say Philip Kennedy Johnson is taking that mythos of the Great Old Ones and rolling it into the Infernal Hulk storyline. And Mother of Horrors, Eldest, these are all new characters that are kind of being tossed into the Great Old Ones mythos.
And so Ngathil responds and asks, right, "You command, Ngathil." And that's where he says, "If mother be dead, it should not be you who rules. It is he who be the strongest." And that's why the Eldest chose the body of the Hulk, because one of the long-standing bits of mythos when it comes to the Incredible Hulk within Marvel Comics is that the angrier Hulk gets, the stronger Hulk gets. But there have been instances in Marvel Comics when the Incredible Hulk's strength can be artificially augmented and increased, despite the fact that he's not in a state of rage. And so this is essentially what happens here, is that in turn where the Eldest is consumed right by Ngathil, quite literally swallowed whole, and it's just down in its stomach that all these little monsters and critters kind of start coming out of the woodwork trying to consume this guy. Presumably that's what happens whenever you get swallowed, human or any other creature, a whale or whatever. These things come out and literally just start tearing you apart. And so Eldest just says, "Well struck, brother, but you are not strongest." and quite literally just starts punching holes in the gut of Ngathil and tearing all these creatures apart. But notice this. The Hulk's rage is not increasing. He's not getting angrier and angrier, and if he is, he's simply just not showing it. And so it's one of the things where this incredible level of strength, this enhanced level of strength, is being tapped into. Now, it is also important to understand here that because the Hulk is possessed by the eldest, his base level of strength has already been enhanced just by the nature of that possession. So that could very well be what's happening here, right? Instead of the Incredible Hulk operating on a 10 when he normally transforms, and then just like jumping by base 10 numbers the angrier he gets, that instead he starts off at like a 20 and then just starts jumping by like base 20 numbers or something along those lines. Right? There isn't really a clear line of distinction in terms of like how his strength works in the here and now. It's just kind of guessing. But that's where he just says eldest, hardest, strongest, right? And just starts tearing through his brother's gut and just says, cruelest, wickedest Hulk, yield or die, brother, for I have become truly invincible. And so, in that moment, his brother just kind of like roars and then spits him back out. And that's where the Infernal Hulk says, poor old Ngathil, I did not wake you just to kill you, right? He says, I woke you to make you stronger. And in turn, Infernal Hulk reaches out and touches Ngathil, and when that happens, he bestows him with a portion of his strength, and he says, accept my gift and obey me. Reclaim our oceans, gather the Ikari, and send them far and wide. And he says, together, we will take back all of the earth. So again, all this is being rolled into the old god mythos. And that's where Namor shows up here, right? And Namor says, Hulk, right, you cowed this guy, the God Eater. I would not have thought it possible even of you. The others were wrong about you. Had you not been here, this city would be destroyed. And that's an important thing to grasp here, is because while Marvel doesn't really focus often on the various monsters and demonic entities that they have within their mythos, outside of like Ghost Rider, Scarlet Witch, Doctor Strange, and occasional Wolverine stories, a lot of these monsters are incredibly powerful, so much so that if any group of superheroes were to try to face off against them, outside of an artificially enhanced Hulk, it would probably destroy them all. And there's a lot of demons that exist like that out in Marvel Comics. Chthon and the Flickering Realms, right? Set the Serpent God. There are all kinds of beings that if they were to invade the main Marvel universe, Dormammu is a classic example, they would lay waste to the superhero landscape, and there's almost nothing anyone could do about it. For example, if Zom were to invade the main Marvel universe, I would say there's a credible argument to be made not even reality warpers would stand a chance against the power of Zom, and Zom would destroy them all. Because Zom was so powerful, Eternity had to go to the Living Tribunal and ask for aid, and the Living Tribunal had to lock Zom away. That was the level of power that that guy had, right? Doctor Strange does not draw on his power willy-nilly. So it's kind of nuts when you start getting into like these ethereal and demonic forces within Marvel. But where Namor is addressing the Infernal Hulk, the Hulk turns around, right, and just says, I sent Ngathil away because your deaths do not yet interest me. When they do interest me, you will see me again. And so, in that moment, his brother just kind of like roars and then spits him back out. And that's where the Atlanteans ask, right? How will we defeat such beasts as this? Because monsters are being woken up all over the area. And Namor just says, the surfacers spoke true. We have not the strength nor the craft to face him alone before he returns. We must find Bruce Banner. And so that's when you pick up with yet a kind of post-credit scene with Bruce himself, right? He just kind of jumps back to this office party, right? Where he's just kind of working this mundane job and living this mundane life right out here in Muncie, Indiana. And it's honestly kind of endearing, right? When they're going back and forth, right, you'll say, happy birthday, and that one of them says, Heather, you and David, get in some photos. I haven't got you in a single one yet, right? And that's where they say, okay, well, David likes taking photos, and I've been stuffing my face the whole time. And that's where like a news broadcast comes on of like this monster out in the Atlantic Ocean. This woman says like, guys, are you seeing this news? Right? This is crazy.
And that's where she says David and I stay pretty out of the loop, right? We don't really focus on what's happening in the outside world. So, for the most part, Muncie is kind of an enclosed system to a degree, right? They just kind of exist in their own little world. And that's basically it. And that's where Ricky just says, I hear that too, right? It's just depressing. And he's like, I gotta practice some self-care, right? I mean, you can't let the world get to you that way. And that's where Sophie says there's all these horrible things happening. That town in Kentucky, and now a ship just went down in the Atlantic, right? And that's where Ricky says those monster vids are all AI for sure, right? You could tell that none of them are real. Now they are, but these guys can't tell the difference between what's an AI video and what's a real video. And so that's where the statement's made, something's happening, right? My son Tommy is a soldier at Fort Campbell, and they won't even let him talk about what they're doing. And so that's where the conspiracies begin to run around, because at that point, Bruce Banner steps in, right? He's like, come on, Downey Downer, right? It's your birthday. Get some cake before Ricky eats it all. And that's when you find out that this guy they're calling David is actually Bruce Banner, right? That Bruce Banner is just operating under a fake name. Technically, his whole name is Robert Bruce Banner, not David Bruce Banner. And so, operating with this fake name, it allows him to kind of just disappear into the world. And so they kind of go back about this idea, right, when they're talking about getting angry and so on and so forth, right? They're joking more than anything else. Like when David says, right, Ricky's going to eat all the cake, that the statement's made, you better take it, Natty. David's got quite the temper. And that's where it's asked, like, David, seriously? And Bruce just says, she's teasing me. I was a little bit of a hothead back in the day. And again, that's where Ricky's like, come on, David, let it out, right? Give us a proper rage out. And Bruce just says, sorry, Ricky, not a chance. I'm afraid you wouldn't like me if I did. And so what we get in the next issue is seemingly what happened to Bruce, how he ended up in this place, all of which is again building to the fight between Infernal Hulk and the One Above All. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, drop a like. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later.